A very good morning to all of you here and as well as those who are connected online. So now we are moving on to action part of research methodology. Briefly about me. Okay. So I've been in radiation oncology since 2004 and like you all, I also attended a research methodology course back in 2008 and that triggered my research journey. Thereafter, I conducted an RCT, went out for 5 years. I also had 3 major research funding, and most of the experience in research also came through in the last 2 years when I was an active member of the Independent Research Board Review Board at CNC, which sees a lot of protocols being reviewed. I've had experience in genomics in breast cancer at Johns Hopkins. I've done mice tumor models for 1 year in Seattle. University of Washington, proton therapy there. I worked on Monte Carlo algorithms in medical physics. And currently I focus on quantitative image analysis and we are setting up a lab for AI in radiation oncology. So that's the brief with which I'm going to talk to you about, mainly from what I have learned and to do as well as not to do. So in research. So the current focus is on protocol writing. So I would tell you what elements that should go into protocol writing, how to make it look good. Also, what does a reviewer look at in a protocol? So mainly I will touch upon the important points that you need to put in. I'm not going to go through the entire methodology section, but the points that you may have to include in it. So I will assume that after so much of exercise, you already have a hypothesis. You have decided on the outcomes that you are looking at. You have a broad idea as to what design that you are going to choose based on your question. You have convinced yourselves and others that why you should do this study, why it should be done in your institution and that too by you. That conviction has to be there, and you have also justified your approach. So with this assumption, let's go to design and methodology, how to match these two. So if you look at the sequence, the research question follows the outcome, the setting, the time. Finally, you reach the sample size. That's how we have designed the study. But in the real world, this arrow is important, that this is an iterative process. Okay, you think of all these possibilities, then you think it is whether it is operational. And then you go back to your research question. 2-3 times your research question undergoes a modification. And finally, you arrive at a match where all these are possible. And that exercise is what is happening in these 3 days or 4 days. So don't think that the question or the hypothesis or the first question that you came with is going to be the one that you're going to do. It will all depend on all the operational variables and that will influence your action or the initial question. So some of the common points when you write methodology is that it has to be very lucid and clear. I've told some of you that it need not be so we have, as part of ERB in CMC, we review protocols from all specialties. So there have been instances when people from other specialties have complained, see, you don't understand my logic because you don't work in that specialty. You are a radiation oncologist. How do you understand cardiology? But that is not the point. The reviewer need not be a specialist from your place. They need to understand in a very lucid manner what you are trying to say. The science has to be understood. So it's your responsibility to write it in a very clear manner so that any person of science can understand it. I don't say that a layman should understand it, but a person of science should be able to understand what you are trying to say. And also, always anticipate all the possibilities. When you think of your research and write a methodology, anticipate all the risks associated with it. I will come in detail to that, but that also should reflect in your writing methods. Okay. And whenever you have multiple objectives, describe the methods for each objective with respect to timeline and setting. That is also very important. You cannot just focus on one major primary objective and write your methods. When you have such secondary objectives, please make sure that you have given attention to that too when you have written your methodology. So I will now broadly divide the studies into interventional, observational, diagnostic studies and other research studies, and I will focus on those 3 and tell you how methods can vary in all this. So if you look at a interventional study design, here the focus is on the exposure or the new thing that you are introducing into treatment. So that's very clear. Okay. So first of all, when you enter into an interventional design, you should always say, there are essential regulatory frameworks because you are going to do trials on a human being. Okay, so ethics clearance, obviously all studies should get it, but if it is a drug, you need CGI approval. You need to be certified for good clinical practice. If you have to get external funding for clinical trials, animal studies need animal ethics clearance. You cannot just say, I want to do the study on 100 mice. You have to justify the use of each mice and to the animal ethics board. And also, you have to account for study related events and how you are going to compensate for that. So many institutions will have a blanket insurance for all the studies conducted under them. So you have to check whether your institution covers for that. If not, how are you going to take care of the eventualities of the patient in the trial? What if they have morbidity, they need ICU care? Are you going to ask them to pay for that? So that is where study insurance or the institutional support for the adverse events, those should be foreseen and put in your methodology. Okay, so in an interventional trial, so essential elements, definitely you have to focus on inclusion and exclusion. All studies you need that. But here, there are two ways of thinking. You also see, you just heard about real world evidence from Patil. So you should also realize if your study has to be applied in clinics, can I do it with stringent criteria? And once I do it with very pristine patients, and then I bring it to clinics, none of them will be eligible for it. So look at pragmatic inclusion criteria, where you can be a little liberal. Can I do the study on what I see in the clinics on those group of patients and prove it? Then only I can apply it. So think very clearly about your inclusion. I've seen certain protocols with 20 inclusions and 20 exclusions. When you have that, you will find it tough to make sure that you get your trial may finish, but you may not recruit, you may not treat any patient more because they are not the real patient. They are all very selected patients. When you have mixed designs, when you have a prospective component and an added retrospective component, the inclusion, and that's a very common mistake that we see, the inclusion is common for both, which may not work. Please think whether retrospective component can have the same inclusion. If not, you write another set of inclusion for your retrospective cohort that you are going to put in. What are the secondary endpoints? Secondary objectives, if you have, please think of them also in your inclusion criteria. Okay, you can even add another inclusion set for your secondary objectives for that particular analysis. Then, since the focus is on the exposure, you have to clearly define the intervention agent. So some of you would have written, I want to give this tablet daily for 10 days. No, it's not like that. I want to give this milligram of this drug at this time prior to this treatment for this many days. So that's a better definition of an intervention agent. So that exposure has to be very clearly and specifically described. Okay, it cannot be written loose. Similarly, the comparator agent also. So if you have a placebo or if you have another agent you are comparing, you should very clearly define what am I comparing with or what is my comparison arm having. If it doesn't have anything, you should describe the standard of care. That also has to be put in very clear. So what are the other specific elements when you do intervention design? Some of you may be doing a randomized control trial. So the method of randomization is very important. I don't have to tell you, there are various kinds of randomization which is listed here. But also there is one more thing that you should mention in your methodology. At what point are you going to randomize these patients into your trial? What is the point of randomization? So that is also very important. So this tells the reviewer that you have actually thought of all these possibilities. Okay. So then allocation concealment. So if you have an intervention and comparator agent, you should also have thought of, and it's a blinded trial, you should also have thought of how do you make sure that you do not preferentially allocate one patient to this particular arm. So that has to be avoided. So in a proper trial, you should have allocation concealment, especially in a blinded trial. And there are various methods to do it. You can actually look at it and go read about it. Then blinding and masking. So who all are blinded? Is it an open label? So many of us feel that, okay, a triple blinded, double blinded trial, I will do that fantastic research. But practically, sometimes it may not be easy to do that. So be logistics aware. See whether we can do a blinded trial, especially in terms of placebo. Doing a placebo trial is also not that easy. Yesterday, I was sharing one story with my group. Sorry if it is a repetition. This is a story which is commonly said among research circles. So there is this crossover study where the investigator has actually made a capsule, blue and white capsule, and he matched a very nice blue and white capsule for the placebo. And he did the study, and this one patient on fine day came back and told them, "Sir, I know today I now I'm taking placebo." So he was very wondering why, how did they identify? Because I matched everything. How did this happen? Then he thought, okay, I will ask them itself. How did you distinguish? So he said, it's either. See, previously it used to float. Now it sings when I flush. So think of all these. Think of from the patient's point of view. Somebody was saying, okay, chlorophyll in yesterday's trial. No, so you said the significant thing patient identifies that is the stool turns green. So if you're going to give a placebo, the other patient will know that, okay, my stool is not turning green. Okay, so you will have to match for that. So do you want to really get into these complications? Because if you want to match, you will have to get some approval to get this new thing to the patient. So think when you think ambitious about placebo, look at the practical issues related with it. Okay, so always good to include and plan what is the date of first enrollment. So these are things that we actually look for when we review a protocol. Whether when is he planning to start the study, how long are they going to do this trial for? Mention that very explicitly. Protocol variations. Okay, not all trials will go as per plan. Okay, so a good researcher would have actually anticipated risk. Okay, these things. See, a research is always a yes or no question. You don't start doing a research saying that my question is going to be answered as yes. We all wish it is, but you cannot do a research anticipating. That's why you do a research. So you have to be ready to accept a no answer. And that no answer may come early in the research also. You don't have to then go and find the answer in the remaining people. So that is why important to anticipate and mark a point for an interim analysis. A plan for withdrawal of participants. You will always think, okay, I tell them they will take this therapy, but they may not. Okay, sometimes they will feel fed up with your questions, fed up with the visits that they have to make for research tests, which the other friend who is not in the research did not have to come. They make friends in your clinics. Okay, I had to come, but they don't have to come. I have to come because of the research. So they will say, I can't come anymore. So you should be open to it. You should not become angry with them. So you should have this open approach of, okay, I will accept these withdrawals, account for that, plan for that inflation in your sample. All this comes in when you think of your methods. Think of your DSMB. There is a data safety monitoring board in each research institution. So you should have a plan to report adverse events to them, and they will have their own mechanism to advise you whether to continue or stop your trial. So be aware of your DSMB. Always good to know who is your DSMB, how frequently do they, what is the protocol for DSMB reporting in your institution. Always to be aware. So in our institution, for all interventional trials, we have to mention the DSMB in our institution. Trial insurance, I mentioned earlier. And also, it's also important in interventional studies. These are for major studies. There should be post-trial benefits. That is, if you have done an intervention and that intervention is useful, you wanted to give capecitabine for a patient or for 6 months and see whether it's benefiting in a metastatic breast cancer or whatever, and you find that the intervention arm is doing well. So after 6 months, you cannot just tell them, see, trial is over, I can't give you these tablets. That is not ethical. So how are you going to continue that? So post-trial benefits. So that's a very simple situation, but if you think of it, there are various situations wherein in oncology, you will have to extend a post-trial benefit. Think of that, anticipate for that, plan for that, budget for that. The sample size, not my purview, but I would just say your primary outcome is with which your study is powered. So your sample size is calculated based on the primary objective or the primary outcome. And ideally, this is a patient-centric outcome. And there are additional endpoints. But what we plan in, see, I said it's an iterative process. So your sample size actually determines your research question, and your methods kind of change because of that. So always think of your sample size. What is your realistic sample? And based on that, you should do it. So always when you write methods, your target sample size should be there in your mind, and the rationale for that sample size should be there. So we always tell everyone, whoever writes even a pilot project, to actually calculate the sample. That is mandatory for all research proposals that we receive in CMC. Even if you say for this particular difference to show, I need to show 100 patients in each arm, but I would be able to recruit only 50. We would let that study go through because this person has actually found out, okay, to get the real answer, this is it, but they can realistically do only this much, which is fair enough, but you should know what is actually the sample needed to find a particular answer. So these are for smaller studies. I mean, we don't want you to be very, for you to, research has to be facilitatory. IRBs have to be facilitatory. So we don't stop a trial because you are saying sample is unrealistic. You can still do a smaller, but always calculate and be aware of it. You should have a statistical analysis plan, which would be discussed later. And since it is intervention study, I just wanted to tell you, you should also have a plan as to whether it will be an intention to treat analysis or a per protocol analysis. Please read about it. I'm not elaborating, but each of it has its significance. Doesn't mean that per protocol is bad. Per protocol is also important when in a certain setting, especially in phase 2s, when you have to actually prove the benefit and then take it to phase 3. We always need the budget plan. So your methods decide the budget. Okay, so budget plan, that's a totally big talk for how to write a budget, but please make sure that you have your budget plan in mind with all the possibilities in it. And also the publication plan, which is also something which you have to anticipate, because you will have multiple people along with you working. You have to be explicitly communicating upfront what their roles will be and how I will be acknowledging you when it comes out as a paper. Whether I will be first author, I will be second author, corresponding author, who will be that. Some of the roles it's good to assign upfront rather than fighting over it at the end of the trial. Okay, so people will also take ownership. Okay, I'm going to do this like. So we always do the publication plan when the IRB thing is put up. Okay, this is another important thing to add up in any study, especially interventional study, an algorithm. So a visual representation of what you are going to do is very important. When you do that exercise, see, I always, when I do trials, I go back and look at my algorithm, whether anything has gone wrong. Okay, I will show you bigger algorithms, but writing up a very clear algorithm is also very important when you write up the protocol. In an intervention trial, always think in a randomized trial, you have to report in the consort guidelines, which also when you write up the protocol, I always in an RCT, I will make up a consort by myself. We may not have the numbers, but I will actually put the anticipated numbers so that I'll know what percentage of dropouts and what I can do, whether intention to treat or for protocol analysis. So consort chart is very important. Then another thing that could impress your reviewers is to have a Gantt chart, which is a timeline. As so you would know when you would start the study, when you would put this intervention, when you would start analysis. In multiple intervention studies, this is very important to have a timeline. For any kind of planning, actually, this kind of chart is very important. But these are certain things that would boost the reviewer's impression of your protocol. Okay, this fellow has thought about what are the ways he is going to do the study. Okay, so that's in brief about interventional studies. Many of these can be applied in other designs also. Something specific to observational design, the focus here is on data. Okay, how you collect the data. And here you want the data to be, if it is a match trial, data to be uniformly collected in all arms. So the focus in writing the methods in a observational design is where do you get the data from? What are the variables that would influence the data? What are the confounders that you can anticipate? What is the bias? Always, we had a good session where Shantam described you the possible biases that may happen. And yesterday you asked me whether bias can be corrected. Bias cannot be corrected. Bias is something which you, at the end of a study, you will find that there is this difference, but I cannot interpret it because there is a bias. Okay, so bias can only be mitigated. So as a researcher, when you write your methods, anticipate your bias and plan a strategy for bias mitigation. Write that very clearly. These are the biases I anticipate. Because of that, I am doing these steps. Very clear methods. For each study, you can find answers to that. How do you match cases and controls? Missing data, especially in an observational design, there will be a lot of missing data because you want some 10, for example, you want some 10 variables from one particular individual to do the analysis, but you have only 8. So how are you going to handle the other 2? So you have to have a plan for all that. Again, sample size and analysis plan, which is common. Again, like consort in observational design, there's something called strobe statement, which also tells you a checklist of items that has to be included in observational design when you report the design. So if you look at that, you will know what all elements you have to add in your methodology when you plan your trial. Okay, now studies on test or diagnostic accuracy. So this will include diagnostic tests, or even now many people are doing prediction models. They are also designed in the same way. Okay, so here the focus is on the test that you are designing, or the new test that you are trying to bring in, or a new biomarker that you are trying to bring in. So again, here you have to clearly define what is your new test, the index test, and what is the current standard of care, or the test that exists to which your test is being compared to. These two are like intervention and comparator agent interventional design. You have to have what is the index test and what is the comparator that you are going to do. And you also have to define the time points at which you are doing this test and the comparison test, and also the time at which the people are recruited into the test. All this has to be anticipated when you are doing a diagnostic test. So reference standard, very important. As I said, index test is there. SOPs. Okay, so in any diagnostic studies, the for example, biomarker studies, you have to actually what is that you are including the methodology, the SOP for standardized testing, for index test and experiment, and the reference standard. So that has to be put in very clearly into your methods. It's not just that I will do this test and collect the report. Okay, that is like you are sending into the lab and collecting the report. No, but in the methods, you have to actually find out how this test is standardized, how this new test is standardized. Are the personnel trained to do in a standardized way? Have you thought of that? If one person is doing that and he leaves and next person is doing it a different way, your results are going to be changing, and your study will never see the light. So please anticipate all these issues, and if you write it down, you will know, okay, these are the possibilities that are going to happen. Again, in a test, you should actually make plans for interpretation. Okay, this is this I will consider as positive, this I will consider as negative. What happened to unclear results? How are you going to handle that? Are you going to retest that? All these have to be put up in your methodology. Anticipate the risk. That's a basic part of methodology writing. Another important thing in a diagnostic test is to anticipate the utility of the test. Okay, you are doing the test. At the end of it, how are you going to apply it? Okay, it can actually introduce a new treatment, or it can actually reduce the treatment. So based on that, the sensitivity or the specificity of the target test or the power of the target test will vary. So you should know your confusion metrics when you actually design a diagnostic study. So essential references that you need, as I said about consort and strobe, is STARD and QUADAS. Okay, so these you can refer yourself. STARD is more standardized. It's a prospective thing for developing a diagnostic study, and these two are available on the net for you to actually look into the details. So if you look at it, you can see whether in your methods you have added all the elements that you need to report this study in future. Okay, some other things which are very important. Some of them are commonly missed in proposals that we read. Focus on ethics. So basically consent, you will be creating a consent for your studies. It has to be a layman's explanation in a very simple way a layman can understand. So always better to give it to a layman and ask them for the feedback, whether you have understood this and see it. Most importantly, in the methodology, what people miss often is who is going to take the consent and at what point are you going to take the consent. So there was one study wherein the radiologist wanted to actually introduce a very inert gel into the vagina prior to MRI scanning so that they can see the cervix very clearly. Okay, so at what point are you taking the consent? They're taking just before the scan is done. So is that a right point to do? No, it is not, because the patient has come prepared for the scan and suddenly doctor or whoever the technician is giving you a this thing saying that I want to take the, then they think, okay, out of fear, they will give consent because they have prepared everything to come to do the scan. That is not the right point. Practically, you think that is easy, but ethically that is wrong. Ideally, it should have been a setting where patient is free to say no. I had this issue when I went to for an admission for COVID. They gave me a consent for, we will collect all your data for future analysis at the point of admission. So I said, how will I say no to it? Because I want to get admitted. So these are not, so the institution changed that protocol. So these are all point of consent. Mentioning that in your methodology is very important. Vulnerable groups, think of the vulnerable groups that can come into your protocol, because you don't want for example, a palliative study, you may not restrict it to less than 70, and or for example, prostate trials, you still have vulnerable groups there, because there are older people who are dependent on son, daughter, and they might be giving consent. So it's very important to know that who is giving consent, are they vulnerable, is it by will that they're giving. Same with children, and now there is child assent also. If you are a child between 12 and 18, then you need an assent, that the child has to sign. Less than 12, the parents can give, it's a consent. Okay. Data confidentiality. So how are you going to store the data? Who is going to have the data? How are you going to share data? Is the data, how is the patient anonymized in your data setting? All these have to be explicitly mentioned. So now many of the funding agencies ask for this specifically. How are you going to do this? But even if it is not asked for, as a researcher, it's your duty to think about it, how you're going to handle this data and mention it your methods. I've already mentioned you about the potential benefits and risks to the participants, which also should be mentioned to them in the information sheet when you take a consent. Post-trial benefits also has to be mentioned to them. Okay, so there are trials which will pay the participants, like you are coming from this far, probably from Navi Mumbai to Parel, you have to travel for exam. You are supposed to pay them, but if you are doing that, you have to justify that. Ideally, you are supposed to compensate for their travel, for their coffee, all those things. In many larger setting, bigger trials, we all do that because that is ethical. But when you do these payments, it should not be an inducement also. For the payment, they should not be coming for that. So that also has to be anticipated. Some specifics to external grants. This may not happen in usual ones. Career grants are there. So it is always, yesterday I was telling my group, it's always very important to have a very good resume made. Okay, a bio sketch of yourself. Why are you a researcher? Why are you a clinician? Why do you want to do this research? You yourself should be convinced why you should be done, and that should reflect in your write-up also. That bio sketch should be very clear. That shouldn't come in the methods, but many external agencies will ask one paragraph of bio sketch and why you should do this research. Significance of your research. So in your write-up, the significance of your research in the science should come out. The innovation of your research. Some people would ask you to specifically write what is the innovation. Okay, so you have to be able to clearly see that. Risk mitigation, I've been talking about it so far. Always anticipate risk and have the risk mitigation strategies ready. And at the end of all methodology, okay, you will have so much of ambitious program, but you can always say at the end of 2 years, these are my deliverables. At the end of 3 years, these are my deliverables. So as a reviewer, I feel, okay, this guy is realistic. If we give them money, they will do a good job. At least of the 3 deliverables, if they do one, the funding agency is happy, they will fund you. So please be very clear about what you can achieve. So now I will go into certain examples, which are experiences that I have gone through, and share that with you so that it will kindle some thoughts within you. So this was one phase 2. This is way back in 2008. I designed this phase 2 randomized control trial. And this was having an placebo controlled triple blinded trial where I used resistant starch in one arm of cervical cancer patient and usual digestible starch in another arm. By then I got around 60 lakhs from DBT. By the time I started the trial, DBT at that time used to call you to Delhi for review every year. Now they stopped it. So first year they called for review. By then I had only 10 patients in each arm. Okay, so I am this young researcher who is very enthusiastic. So I actually analyzed these things, made graphs and went there. That entire DBT team tore me apart. Who are you to look at the data? Who is your DSMB? First time I was hearing the word DSMB. I never knew what is DSMB. So then they said, this guy even doesn't know what a DSMB is. That's when I went back and learned what DSMB is. So you are not supposed, in a blinded trial, the investigator should not be actually looking at the data. I was over enthusiastic. What happened? I restarted the recruitment, restarted the trial. So be aware of all the possibilities. Okay. The decision on delta, what I wanted to say is that when I designed the trial, I kept a delta for 20%. Being realistic, because my sample, that's what I can achieve, and I completed the trial. But what happened? The difference was not good enough to show significance. So I'm not here, I'm not there.
But realistically, why did I keep that delta? We have to be very clear. So I thought, okay, around 7 out of 10 patients in my clinic gets this toxicity. If I'm going to do this amount of intervention, at least I need to reduce this to 4 out of 10. Otherwise, doing this whole exercise is, so you need that quantum of difference. Otherwise, number needed to treat will actually help you decide your delta. Also, your sample size and your deliverables. Okay, this is another one which you can see the picture algorithm that we do for studies. This IV fluid study again, we wanted to give daily prophylactic IV fluids for patients on head and neck radiotherapy. Actually, the results were good. But when we wanted to design this and recruit patients, initial thought was we will only do high chemo radiotherapy patients in particular site. Then we thought, okay, if we do that, it's not really going to give me the answer that we need to get in the clinic. So we did a pragmatic inclusion. We included all the head and neck cancer patients on radical radiotherapy. So think of ways, okay, what fits in your clinical setting and use your inclusion. And most importantly, the point of consent here. So this is a big dilemma in major trials where you have one arm where you intervene and another arm you just leave them alone. Okay, so you take a consent that you will be into a randomized control trial and tell them that you may get this or get that. Patient would have been explained in detail about the side effects of the inclusion, benefits of your inclusion and all. And after randomization, you are telling them, oh, you will not get it because you are in the control arm. So that's a big disappointment, especially in a metastatic setting or something where there is no more treatment, you are actually offering something. So in the IV fluid study, we actually approached the institutional review board to ask whether can I take consent after randomization. They thought over it and they said there's only one problem with it. If you take consent after randomization, there may be dropouts. Okay, so you run the trial for 1 year, see whether there are many dropouts in your intervention arm. If not, you proceed this way. If there are many dropouts, then you have to go back and start the trial with point of randomization, consent before the randomization. So these are ways with which we can actually change from the standard, be practical onto what you want to do, what question you are answering and what setting you are doing it. Okay, so this another one. So this question here was funding. So I wanted to actually test whether we can approach with radical treatment in inoperable oral cavity cancers. Inoperable oral cavity, generally we do palliative approach, palliative radiation. Shall we just go radical for those patients who are very motivated? And many private centers do that, but we don't have data on it. So ideal setting, ideal answer is a randomized control trial. But if I'm going to do that randomized control trial, there are a lot of ethical issues where you treat one. I'm actually again asking a patient and then randomizing them is not ethically right. Secondly, where is the funding going to come from? So these are all standard of care. So one way we did was to make it an observational design instead of an interventional design. So he spoke about cohort design. So there's something called experimental cohort design, where you make them as cohorts. The experiment is actual standard of care that's happening, and then you observe the outcome. So there your liability is less. So there are various ways with which you can get the answer. So this is the trial schema for that particular study, Pragrad study. So the other one is the diagnostic study, or we are actually developing a AI related prediction model in head and neck cancer. So here again, when I decided on the confusion metrics, so what is the power of the prediction model that you want? So if I'm going to predict something in head and neck, advanced head and neck cancer, and decide that I want to escalate their treatment, the prediction model will tell me that these are patients who will do bad, so I will give additional treatment to them. In that case, I can miss out some patients, because anyway, even if they don't, the prediction model doesn't predict well, I would still give them standard of care. But if I'm going to do a dose de-escalation with the prediction model, I am going to actually leave out some treatment for the patient. Then the prediction model has to be powerful. It has to be very specific. So depending on how you're going to use the tool, your specificity and sensitivity of the model has to be decided. And based on that, you have to do the modeling. So that is what we have did in this radiomics study. So like you, I said, no, 2008, I attended this FLIMS. And that's where I brought this idea of, at that time, IMRT just came in, whether do hyperfractionated IMRT and all. Okay, at the end of the thing, I ended up doing a case series. I did some 6 patients and published it. But probably this question that you ask here is not what you're going to do as your big trial. Probably the next one. That's what happened to me. The next one I did, I could actually go through an RCT, get funding, and publish it. And so it is, the focus is not on the current proposal alone. The focus is also on to get you into this bandwagon of research and get you to do nice ethical research. Okay. To conclude, this is from Janet Tracy, who also taught me some research methodology. So in a trial, what we spoke of as yesterday is the cerebral part, the brain of the trial. That is your research question, your research outcome, all these things. Now, your what takes you through is the budget and other support things, but the spine of the trial is the methods that which you are going to do today. So, which is very important. So, when you start writing your methods, start with an overview of what you want to do, and in one paragraph, describe it very succinctly. And then you start elaborating it under various sections that I have told you based on the type of design that you are going to use. And at each point, I reiterate, relate your description to the objectives with respect to time and setting. Very important at each point to connect back to those. Many a time when we read proposals, there is no, they will start with one thing and they will end with another thing. There is no connection with this one to that one. So always keep connecting to your objective. So that's one way to make sure that things are thought of well. So I told you the details have to be very clear, lucid. Even a person of any science should be able to understand that references, key reference. So many people try to put a lot of references to inflate things. What is enough for us to refer and understand? So for example, if you're presenting a phase 2 trial, what I want to know is the phase 1 data. So the anticipation is very limited. Where you give 20 trials to me, I will not find the right thing that you wanted to tell me. So be very clear and specific. References always try to make it very modern. So don't give me 1967 reference, 1990 reference. So look back, see whether something is modern and more relevant is available. So another thing is always a small pilot is always good. Okay, so try to do some 5 patients in your study, see what has happened. So that actually augments your approach. So you can actually say, I have done in these patients and found that it is good. Okay, so risk mitigation. That's very important when you write methods. Anticipate your failures. Okay, a no answer is not a failure. Okay, yes and no in a trial is a success. Okay, you are actually doing a trial not to find yes as an answer. No is also your success. You are finding that it doesn't work. Never think yes is always the success. Okay? And always the timeline, which is very important. So I thank the IRB and most people who have taught me on this, and I will be happy to take more questions. Thank you.